بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله. First of all, I want to say that Shaykh Abdullah was actually planning on coming back today. He wanted to give a farewell talk and to say goodbye to people, but he unfortunately had to, the only flight that they could get out was today. He's going to Madrid, and he's leaving actually tonight. But he did say that he was very happy to be with everybody, and he hopes it was of benefit for people. While he was here, he asked for dua from everybody and said he would make dua for all of us also. So may Allah bless him, inshallah, and keep him, preserve him, keep his health, and also let us benefit from his knowledge. Inshallah, it's a great gift to have him teaching. I was asking him some questions about lineage today, and he said it's important that you remind people the importance of lineage. That lineage is one of the blessings that Allah has given us, is that that we know who we're from. It's a great blessing if you're born with two parents that were married and know who they are, and that's a great blessing, because now increasingly people are being born in very strange circumstances. Now even some people have go to a bank and just get genetic material and inseminate, and they don't even know. They had a case in England of two young people that fell in love at the university, and they had this irresistible attraction to each other that was almost, they were very surprised by it. But when they had some genetic testing, they were going to get married. They were actually brother and sister from a donor bank. So, and that's exactly what the ulama, I read that in a British newspaper, so I didn't make that up. But that's exactly what the ulama said. One of the reasons why they prohibit those things is that was one of the reasons that they gave. So we went through the lineage, which is important to know where the Prophet came from, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Allah says taqallubuka fi sajidin, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah says that he watched your, he was present in your movement through the loins of these different people in states of submission. And the ulama say that all of the Prophet ﷺ's parents were believers. That's our belief. That's the dominant belief of the Ahl Sunnah, that Amina and Abdullah were actually believers. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu mentions in the Fiqh al-Akbar, it's attributed to him. Some of the ulama reject the attribution, but it's attributed to him that he said, وَمَاتَ أَبَوَاهُ عَلَى الْكُفْرِ. And then he says, وَمَاتَ أَبُو طَالِبٍ كَافِرًا. That the parents of the Prophet died in a state of kufr, and Abu Talib died a kafir. Imam al-Barzanji and others have noted that even though in some of the more authoritative narrations of that text, which is an early text and most likely Abu Hanifa wrote that text. There's a difference of opinion about it, but certainly the Hanafi scholars that use that text and the Maturidi school that uses it tend to consider it to be a sound text from Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. But that actual statement in the text, most of the soundest scholars reject it. They say that Abu Hanifa didn't say that. The ones that do say it's a hafwa, it was a mistake, and every scholar makes mistakes. So, but that is the dominant opinion. So it's important to know that we believe that his parents were believers all the way back. And also that when he said in that text that they died ala al-kufri, but they said about Abu Talib, but he died a kafir, one of the things that was derived from that is that because Abu Talib had known the Prophet after the Bi'tha and had not accepted the message, that he had a different hukm than the parents. So even though it said they died in a state of kufr, in other words, for us, for instance, there's no doubt that divination, things like that, are types of kufr. But those were the practices of the Jahili Arabs. So they even Abd al Muttalib, who we believe was a believer, was doing practices that in the Abrahamic tradition, if you look in the Old Testament, it actually, Moses is commanded to kill the diviners, the astrologers, and it's pretty intense in the Old Testament. So the point is that they were people of Fatra, which is Ahlul Fatra, are the people before prophets. They're in between prophets. Or they did not have a message that came to them. Those are Ahlul Fatra. And technically, according to Imam al-Ghazali, and this is the opinion that I prefer, but Allahu A'lam, who am I to prefer an opinion? I'm not making that. I'm telling you what my heart inclines towards. Abu Hamid in Faisal al-Tafriqa, which is a beautiful book, and it was also translated into English for people that are interested in reading it. The Boundaries of Toleration, Dr. Jackson translated. There's another good translation of it too, also, that was published by Fons Vitae. But in that book, he says that the Ahlul Fatra, that the people who are living even today, who have not heard the message of Islam, have the same ruling as the people of Ahlul Fatra. In other words, they will not be judged or taken into account. And even the people, he goes as far to say, and he stops, it's a very interesting text, he indicates that he had some openings, Imam al-Ghazali, and you will see this in his writings. Imam al-Ghazali is a profoundly spiritual writer. He's one of the few ulama that when he writes, you really feel his presence. Many of the ulama, when they write books, they're absent. But he is somebody who, not only does he talk directly to you, but he often talks to you in the first person, like this is me talking to you. So in that book, he says that in the akhirah will not be different from this world, in that the majority of people in this world have enough blessing to where they want to continue living. They don't commit suicide. But there are people that life becomes so unbearable that they actually do want to leave the world. He said the akhirah will be similar, that the majority of people will be in a state that will be pleasing for them, even the people that have to go through a punishment. And there is a hadith even that Imam Sakhawi mentions that, again, it's not something that you can base a creed on, but I think when Allah is described as Arham ar-Rahimin, that means something. Ibn Hazm took it to the degree where he had to actually say it doesn't mean what it means. That in his trying to deal with punishment and with fire and all these things, he said it means whatever Allah wants it to mean, but it doesn't mean Arham ar-Rahimin to what we know. Well, I don't, that's Ibn Hazm's opinion and his attempt at dealing with that. There are other attempts at dealing with this problem. And it's an important problem. It's a human problem. It's a theological problem, what they call in the West theodicy. It's very complicated. But I think for us as people living in this postmodern era, we're dealing with people that are having a more and more difficult time dealing with pre-modern religion. And part of the reason why they're having a hard time dealing with it is because of things like the Old Testament, of things like certain aspects of the religion. Now, on the one hand, we don't want to water down the religion until it loses its meaning and import. And on the other hand, we want people to embrace the religion and to be able to accept the religion as true. And ultimately, that La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah is the single most important thing in our view of what this religion is about. For people just to be able to say that and to believe it is an incredible gift. To have tawheed is an incredible gift. And so in dealing with that, we have ulama like Ibn Taymiyyah, who in one narration actually comes to the conclusion that the fire has to eventually extinguish in order for that to be consistent with Arham ar-Rahimin. And he uses certain traditions from some of the Salaf, and also he bases on labithina fiha ahqaba, that they are dwell in it. Ahqab, hiqab is 80 years, and so ahqab is the plural of it. So it would indicate, but there are other verses, khalidina fiha abada. He makes interpretation of those. Our opinion, not my opinion, but the opinion of our school and our teachers, and the dominant opinion is that khalidina fiha abada means exactly what it means, abiding therein forever. Ibn Arabi attempted to deal with this problem by saying that the adhab would become adhab, that the punishment would eventually contract and become sweet, and he called them nariyin, that they were people that it became elemental to them, that they were people that were of the fire, ashabul jahim, that was their element, they were in their proper element. And so initially it would be terrible, and then eventually it would actually, they would fall into their element. These are attempts at dealing with this theological problem. That's the only point I'm making, is that you have somebody as conservative as Ibn Taymiyyah grappling with the same problem as somebody as, he's also conservative, Ibn Arabi, to be fair to him, because he's a Zahiri and he's very staunch in his fiqh, but philosophically he was quite open-minded. And so you have these two views. And I think Imam al-Ghazali, to me, is between these two. That's why I like his view the best. And it's a bit heterodox, to be honest. It's not, I wouldn't say it's completely orthodox, his view, but I think it just, to me, it resonates with the time we're living in a way that I feel that we can explain Islam to people in a way that they understand it, and it's rooted in our tradition. It's not something outside of our tradition, and that's why I do like this position a lot. But his position is that kufr is a rejection of the truth when the truth is clearly the truth. That kufr is not rejecting something you believe to be false, truly believe to be false. And that's why he said we can't really do ta'yin of kufr in this world, because we don't know the hearts of people, which is why the dominant opinion is you can't call anybody a kafir in the Ash'ari madhab. In the Maturidi, kufr is a hal. This is a very interesting distinction in our theology. In the Ash'ari tradition, kufr is a maqam, and iman is a maqam. It's a permanent state. So even when somebody is in a state of kufr, they're actually a mu'min who hasn't realized their iman yet. But the ruh is a believing ruh. It's just at the conscious level, they're still in their heedlessness. And this is why the Ash'aris would say that Abu Sufyan was a believer even when he was fighting the Prophet. He just hadn't realized his state of belief yet. The Maturidi say no. He was a kafir at that time, but he became a believer. And this is why the Ash'ari say you can say, I'm a believer, inshallah. And the Maturidi say you can't say that. You have to say, I'm a believer. Because your state at any given time, you have to be certain of it, that you're a believer. Whereas the Ash'ari is saying, in the long run, I don't know. I don't know what my seal is going to be, but I hope that it's going to be a seal of iman. So it's a khilaf lovely in some ways, but it also gets to the root of this idea that you don't know the state of people. So you can be talking to a Jewish person and they're a believer from that first opinion. You can be talking to a Christian person or a Hindu or something and they're a believer, but they don't know it yet. And likewise, somebody can be in a state of kufr in reality and think they're in a state of iman. So Imam al-Ghazali says, because of that, only Allah can judge people on that. And that's why unless the Sharia, unless the Quran or the sound mutawatir sunnah has indicated that somebody is a kafir, like tabbat yada abi lahab, the Quran says that. So we can't debate that. Unless that's clear, we don't know. And that's why you will never, if you look in the seerah and in the hadith, you won't see the Sahaba calling people kuffar, ya kafir. They say, ya adu Allah, O enemy of God. Ya adu nafsika, O enemy of your own self. They don't say, ya kafir. The only time in Sharia that you can say to somebody you're a kafir is if they call you a kafir. Because it is kufr to call a mu'min a kafir. Like if somebody says to you, ya sariq, O thief, and it's a lie, you can't say, no, you're the thief. You can only say, anta kadhab, you're a liar. But you can't say you're a thief. But if they say you're a kafir, you can say, but anta kafir. And that's why Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, la ukafiru illa man kafarani. I don't make takfir of anyone unless they make takfir of me. And also Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, Imam al-Dhahabi in Sirah Alam al-Nubala mentions in Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari's biography that at the end of his life he said, لا نكفر أحدا من أهل القبلة إنما هي ألفاظ نختلف في تأويلها. We don't make takfir of anybody who faces Mecca. These are semantic differences that we're differing about what things mean. But if they say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and they face Mecca, that I consider them a believer. And al-Dhahabi, strangely enough, says, وَكَذَلِكَ كَانَ شَيْخُنَا إِبْنُ تَيْمِيَّةَ فِي آخِرِ حَيَاتِهِ. And our teacher Ibn Taymiyyah was like that at the end of his life. كَانَ يَقُولُ لَا أُكَفِّرُ مَنْ يُحَافِظُ عَلَى الْوُضُوءِ فَإِنَّ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يحافظ على الوضوء إلا مؤمن. I don't make takfir of anybody that is consistent in his wudu, because the Prophet ﷺ said nobody is consistent in his wudu except a believer. And a nice word in English for wudu, I mean wudu is becoming, but a nice word for it, there's actually a word for wudu in English. It's not ablution. Ablution is a horrible word. It sounds ugly. Like you say, I'm going to do ablutions. It sounds so strange. No, there's a beautiful word, luminations. Lumination is a ritual washing in English that makes one shine. And the word for, in Arabic, wudu, is a washing that gives you wada'a, which is a shine. So it's literally a perfect word for wudu in English. I found that a couple months ago, luminations. I was reading a dictionary and said, wow, that's wudu. Lumination, because it's from luminous. But it's a ritual washing that enlightens one, gives them light in their face. So anyway, that I'm just mentioning that in relation to the parents of the Prophet. Now, all the hadiths, and you will find people, I guarantee if you go back to Bradford or wherever you're going to go back to, you're going to find people, he is right there. The Prophet's parents are in the hellfire. It's in the hadith. Trust me, the ulama have looked at all of these hadiths. So be very careful. Be very careful. The Prophet ﷺ, to say his parents are in the fire is a very, very grave thing. And we believe they're in paradise and they have a high maqam, and that they were believers. And also even Abu Talib, Shaykh Abdullah, and this, I mean, I incline towards that position that he was a believer, but Shaykh Abdullah said tawaqquf, Allahu alam, because the hadiths are strong about it, and so, but Allahu alam, it's Abu Hanifa said, وَمُخْرِجُ أَلْفًا مِنَ الْمَلَاحِ وَمُدْخِلُ أَلْفًا مِنَ الْمَلَاحِدَ أَقْرَبُ مِنْ مُخْرِجِ نَفْسًا وَاحِدَةً. To consider 1,000 people to be believers is better or easier than to consider one believer a kafir. So it's better to make a mistake in 1,000 disbelievers thinking they're believers than to think one believer is a disbeliever. So it's better to err on the side of faith. And that's why in the Hanafi madhab, there's an opinion that anybody that if they call the Prophet, if they just say the Prophet Muhammad, like Karen Armstrong says the Prophet Muhammad, just if they acknowledge his nubuwwah, the Hanafi scholars consider that enough of a testimony, which is why Imam al-Laqani says وَفُسِّرَ الْإِيمَانُ بِالتَّصْدِيقِ وَالنُّطْقُ فِيهِ الْخُلْفُ بِالتَّحْقِيقِ. That Iman is belief, it's ascension, that this is true, and there is a difference of opinion about whether you have to actually articulate your belief. In other words, to say, I believe, or a shahada. So any indication of belief. Imam al-Sawi says that there are 4 categories of human beings. Mu'minun 'inda Allah, wa mu'minun 'inda an-nas, mu'minun 'inda an-nas wa kafirun 'inda Allah, mu'minun 'inda Allah wa kafirun 'inda an-nas, and kafirun 'inda Allah wa kafirun 'inda an-nas. He puts them into those 4 categories. There are believers who are believers with God and believers with people. So people, all of you inshallah are believers with God, and you're believers with the people. And then there's believers with God and disbelievers with the people. So people that are actually mu'minun, but other people think they're disbelievers. Like the Rajul min Ali Fir'aun. The Quran says that he was hiding, yaktumu imanuhu, he was hiding his faith. So there's people that do that. They hide their faith. They don't tell people that they're actually a believer. For whatever reasons, they do it. And then a believer with people, but a kafir with God, which is a munafiq. And then a kafir with people and a kafir with God. So there are people out there that are believers with God, but people don't know that. So now we're going to move to the next section, which is Mawliduhu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Mawlid is a ism, makan, and zaman in Arabic. The maf'il wazn is for place and time. Mawlid is the time the Prophet was born, but the Mawlid is also the place he was born. So for instance, the Mawlid of the Prophet is Mecca. The actual spot he was born in, we know, is there also. The time, the dominant opinion, it was Rabi' al-Awwal, which is a month. In Arabic, it means the first spring. He was born in April, and he was born. April is the most balanced of all the months in terms of weather, and the Prophet ﷺ was, everything about him was balanced. His hair was wavy, it wasn't straight and it wasn't curly. He was of mid-stature. His skin was fair. It was neither really white or really dark. He had a fair skin. It was a lighter, inclined towards light. And part of the wisdom in that is because he was sent to abolish racism, that the fact that he was of lighter skin is something that's helpful, because if he was a dark person, then his desire to eliminate that odious crime could be seen just as a self-serving type of position. But the fact that he was abyad, and the Arabs are considered biyad, they're not considered sud, they're considered biyad, because he was abyad. And I asked this Sudanese, was driving me today, and very nice man. And I told him, so what do you think of Obama? And he said, oh, we like Obama. He said, Obama, tayyib. And I said, really? And he said, oh, naam, naam. And he said, wallahi, ma yahimmi siyasatu wala shay, lakinnu aswad. He said he's black. You know, it was like really made him feel good. I thought that was so beautiful. You know, just people don't realize, you know, so many people, that's such a sign of hope in and of itself, that a country could transcend for a moment. I mean, America is far from transcending racism, but certainly in this moment, there's a type of transcendence there of that's quite extraordinary. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I said to him, it's kind of funny how the Sudanese, because they're Arab, but they mixed with Africans, most of the Arabs put them in the category of blacks. He said, "Ay wallah, huna yaqul abd." They call him just like a slave. And he said, but to be fair, he said, in Sudan we have really dark blacks in the south, and we call them abid. So. So he says, بيان مورد النبي المجتبى صلى عليه الله ما هب الصبا. Now for an explanation of the chosen Prophet's birthday, blessings and peace be upon him, as long as the Levantine rises in the east. And the Levantine is the eastern wind. Now, if you look in the older books, the older maps, you'll see the wind blowing from these directions. People used to be very connected to winds. Most people 100 years ago knew the direction of winds. People have lost that because we don't travel outdoors in the way we're in cars, and so we don't experience wind in the same way. So people would know if you're traveling north and there's a wind to your back, it was a very good thing. Today, oddly enough, pilots are very concerned about winds. So pilots do know about easterly winds. I mean, you have them, the easterlies, the westerlies. They'll say it on, if you watch those funny, the guys that do that, the weathermen. If you watch them, they do say those directions, but nobody's paying attention to that. All they want to know is it going to rain tomorrow or but they're not really thinking about wind cycles. Wind is one of the great signs of God. The Prophet said, "Nusirtu bis-saba." I was given victory by the easterlies. The Kaaba is actually aligned to the four winds. There's four winds in Mecca that used to come into the valley. Now, because of the buildings, you won't notice this, but there was a time when it was open and these winds, and so the walls of the Kaaba are aligned to the Dabur, which is the westerly wind, the Sabah, which is the easterly, the Yamani, which is the from the Janub, from the south, and then the Sham'al, which is from the north. These were the four winds. It's also aligned to Canopus, which is the star. In Arabic it's known as Suhail, and it's the star in the southern hemisphere, which has the same importance in the southern hemisphere that the Qutb, the North Star, has in the north. Suhail is, and this is from Ibn Abbas, that Suhail, that Ibrahim a.s. aligned it to the matla of Suhail. And that's where the Yemeni corner, that's why the Kaaba is off a due north, south, east, and west. The corners of the Kaaba, it's because it was to the winds and then to Suhail. So the matla of Suhail is Canopus, is perfectly aligned to the Kaaba. Now, what's interesting about Suhail, if you go on NASA's website, Suhail is the single most important celestial navigational star. So all of the satellites and all of the space travel is aligned to Suhail. And it's very interesting that's on their website. Because the Kaaba is our connection with the heavens. And so the fact that Suhail is the humankind's most important navigational star when they move out into the heavens with the satellites and the space stations and all these things, because it's the closest star to our solar system that is fixed. Anyway, that's a fa'ida min al-ajaib. But I just wanted to point out about the Sabah. They say that a beautiful wind came when he was born, the Sabah, and the Arabs like the Sabah. But Imam al-Barzanji says, وَلَا يَخْفَى ما في تخصيص ريح الصبا بالذكر من المناسبة الظاهرة من حيث أنها تصبو إلى اتجاه الكعبة التي هي أعظم مكان في مكة التي هي محل حمله وولادته بل هي أعظم بقاع الدنيا بعد البقعة التي ضمت أعضاؤه صلى الله عليه وسلم وفيه نظر لما سيأتي من أن مواضع أجساد الأنبياء أشرف منها. So he says, Sabah, there's no doubt that this wind, this Levantir, has special qualities, that it was appropriate that they manifested at that time because the wind comes towards the Kaaba from the east, and this is the most extraordinary place in the world, in Mecca, and it's where the Prophet ﷺ was conceived, and he was conceived in this month, Rajab, according to this. There's an opinion that it was during Ayyam al-Tashriq, but the opinion of Sahab Tusturi and others is that it was actually the first night of Rajab on Jum'ah, that his conception was Jum'ah, but his birth was on Monday. And then he says, and this is the greatest place in the whole of the world after the place that contains his body. So, and then he says, but there's debate about this. He said, fihi nadar. There's some question about this because of the other places where the prophets are, the other bodies of the prophets like Musa alayhi salam. But this is what I wanted to show you here. He says, وَهِيَ أَنَّ الرِّيحِ إِذَا هَبَّتْ مِنْ تُجَاهِ الْكَعْبَةِ فَصَبَى وَهِيَ حَرَّةٌ يَابِسَةٌ تهب من المشرق تنفع الأبدان وتهيج الأشواق إلى الأحباب والأوطان. That when the easterly wind comes, it's a beneficial wind to the bodies. And this is very interesting because in Chinese medicine, wind is one of the 6 important factors of health. The Chinese consider it very, very significant. Just even going out in wind can be beneficial or harmful depending on what type of a wind it is. So this is what he says. And then he says it also increases one's desire to see one's beloved and one's homeland. And then he says, and that its quality is hot and dry. So it's har yabis. And this gets into humoral theory, which is part of the Islamic medicine, in the Islamic medicine tradition. And there's indication, even though most Western medicine doesn't really adhere, because Galen was the big exponent of this in Western tradition, but it's certainly in both in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and then it's also in Tibb al-Yunani, which is the Hellenistic tradition, and that influences to a certain degree, but we also have it in prophetic medicine, which is Tibb al-Nabawi, and that's why you'll find it in the books of Tibb al-Nabawi, where they talk about these 4 humors, hot, wet, cold, and dry. There's no doubt there's some hadith. There's a hadith in Tirmidhi where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that when he was eating dates, he ate them with cucumber. And he said, هَذَا يُبَرِّدُ حَرَّ هَذَا. This cools off the heat of this. In other words, the cucumber, like we say cool as a cucumber, the cucumber is cold and wet. The date is hot and dry. And so by eating them together, it's balanced. If you eat foods that are hot and dry, it'll have certain effects on the body, especially if you're hot and dry already. If you eat foods that are cold and wet, it'll have effects. Phlegmatic, the 4 humors, which are sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic. In Arabic, it's the Saudawi, Damawi, Balghami, and Safrawi. That, the Damawi people are very cheerful, happy people. That's why in English we say he's very sanguine. Have you heard that term, sanguine? It means cheery or happy. That comes from that humoral theory. We also use the word melancholic. He's very melancholic, or he's colicky, or he's let's see. I don't think we and phlegmatic. No, all those are adjectives that indicate the humoral theory. So the winds have these qualities. I thought that was interesting. Now, if you want to increase your memory, memory is hot and dry. So the more cold and wet foods you eat, the weaker your memory gets. That's why many of the scholars would never eat cucumber, because it's bad for the memory, things like that. I think everything in balance. But if you're interested in this, it's in Imam Zarnuji's book, Ta'alim al-Muta'allim. He has a whole section on strengthening the memory. Raisins, 21 red raisins every morning. I've tried to do that, but I always would forget to eat them. The 21 red raisins are because raisins are hot and dry, and coffee is hot and wet. So coffee is actually beneficial for memory also, and that's been proven. Short-term memory studies, people that drink coffee and then study information actually retain it better than people that don't. So anyway, as long as that was all from the Levantir, the easterly rising in the west. وحملت آمنة الزهرية طوب لها بأكرم البرية. Amina the Zahrite became pregnant with him, and how blessed is she due to the noblest of Allah's creation. So Amina, and طوب لها means paradise for her. So he's putting forward his opinion that she's in paradise. Amina saw many wondrous things according to the tradition. Some of these are apocryphal. Some of them are like Ka'b al-Ahbar relate some of them. She, in one riwayah, saw the heavens open up to her. She definitely she heard a voice telling her to name him Muhammad. She told Abd al-Muttalib, he named him Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There were only 3 Arabs before the Prophet that ever had that name. It was not a name that the Arabs used. And according to the 3 who are known, the reason they were named that is because they were expecting a prophet to come with the name Muhammad, and they named their children that out of hopes that it would be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Amina marries Abdullah, and we know that Abdullah was stunningly beautiful. They said that the Qurayshite women it was like Yusuf when he walked through the town. They would literally be completely infatuated with him. They asked him to marry him, but he married Amina, and they actually had only 3 nights together in the Shi'b of the Hashemite there, which is not. We passed through that to come up here, and then he left, and the light from his face also that was particularly attractive to the women was gone, because one of the women who wanted to marry him before, when she saw him after he consummated the marriage with Amina, she wasn't interested anymore. So he went on the trip, and then he died, as you all know. But that's في رجب الفرد بدار وهبي is where in the Rajab of al-Fard, the singular Rajab, which is this month now, واردها وقيل بل في الشعب. So he says it's a weaker opinion, but it's a khilaf. Barzanji says it was in the Shi'b. So Allah Ta'ala alam. وكان مولد النبي الهادي صلى عليه خالق العباد. The guiding Prophet's birthday, upon him blessings of the Creator of all servants, عام قدوم الفيل للأقوام بإثر 50 من الأيام, was in the year of the elephant's arrival to Quraysh, about 50 days after the event. So he was born in that year, which is generally recorded as 570 in the books of the Western books, and that's the. I mean, we can't. It's hard to know with absolute certainty if it was, but it was definitely 569, 570. Some will even say 571 or 2. So, and then he says, في يوم الاثنين من شهر الأغر في ثالث الشهر أو الثاني عشر. On Monday in the blessed day of month of Rabi' al-Awwal, the 3rd of the month or the 12th month, you'll get 8, 9, 10, 12. There's different opinions. The dominant and strongest opinion, it was on the 12th. And that's what, it's a national holiday in every single country, Muslim country, with the exception of one. But all the other Muslim countries have it as a national holiday to celebrate the Prophet ﷺ's birthday. And historically, it was celebrated with great fanfare throughout the Muslim world. The fact that the Mawlid has died down so much is, I think, a very bad sign, in fact, in the Muslim Ummah. That's my personal opinion. the Mawlid was an immense time of feeding people, of feeding the poor, of charity, of reading the seerah, of reading the shama'il, reciting qasaid, writing poems, delivering poems, visitations. It was a big time because people just felt the blessing of the Prophet, particularly in that month. But the Mawlid is celebrated throughout the year by people that celebrate the Mawlid. So it's not that they don't just celebrate it on Rabi' al-Awwal or the 12th, but literally will recite it. It's very beautiful to recite the Mawlid, and Barzanji's is certainly probably the best and most authoritative. Imam al-Kattani, which is the Moroccan Mawlid, has a beautiful Mawlid also recited in Morocco. But it's something that you really want your children exposed to, the Mawlid. It's important to celebrate the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. The birthday, the Mawlid, if anybody tells you that it's a bid'ah, well, Surah Maryam is basically a Mawlid because it's relating the story of how Jesus was born. And that's what the Mawlid is doing. It's just you relate the story of how the Prophet ﷺ was born. That's all it is. It's looking at his story and celebrating it, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So, and then he said, أولي ثمانين من ربيع الأول موافق النيسان عند الأولي. So, a weaker opinion holds it was the 8th day of Rabi' al-Awwal, which corresponds to the month of April according to the scholarly premiers. في عام حفظ من سني الأسكندري بطالع الجد وكان المشتري مع زحل في وسط السماء تقارن بالعقرب الغراء. So this was around 800 years after Alexander the Great, the sun being in the constellation of Aries. So he was born when the sun was in the constellation. That's what they call in astrology a sun sign. He was born when the sun was in the constellation of Aries. While Jupiter and Saturn were both in the middle of the sky in conjunction with the spectacular constellation Scorpio. So the Jupiter and Saturn were in the constellation of Scorpio. These are planets. This is the ulama. Astrology as a science of divination is prohibited. So to use astrology to try to read the future or something like that is not prohibited. But undeniably, the heavens are meaningful, and there is import to what happens in the heavens. We believe that. And so the ulama do mention these heavenly signs. We know that one of the signs of the end of time is a massive comet that appears in the sky. So there are signs in the heavenly bodies for people that reflect. The Quran swears by the kunnas, the retroactive planets that disappear for a period of time, like Mars. And many of in the Quran, وَالشَّمْسِ وَالضُّحَاهَا وَالْقَمْرِ إِذَا تَرَاهَا وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى. There are many, many oaths by the heavens. So he's just relating where we know where these were at the time, but we don't give them the astrological type of import. The dominant opinion is astrology. Some of the ulama said tawaqquf. Astrology was practiced quite a bit in the Muslim world. Even some of the scholars have practiced a type of astrology, not divination astrology, but they did practice that. But generally, it's just considered to be completely unacceptable. And but I would say that the argument about all the timekeepers and knew the science of astrology, because astrology and astronomy were basically so interrelated. And every astrologer has to know astronomy. They have to know, a real astrologer has to know astronomy. So, فَغَاضَتِ الْمِيَاهُ وَالنِّيرَانُ قد خمدت وانصدع الإيوان أو خمدت وانصدع الإيوان. So Persia's waters dried up and her Magian fires extinguished, and the pillars of Khosros rent asunder. وخرس الملوك والأصنام تناكست فما لها قيام. Kings were dumbstruck and idols everywhere collapsed, never to find again firm footing. It's recorded that night that the kings literally usibu bi kharas, and that's what's in the books. Allah ta'ala alam. There were definitely many amazing things. The waters in Persia dried in a famous lake, and the Magian fires were extinguished, put out, because the fire worshippers kept the fires, but they got put out that night, and idols fell in different places. So these are all the signs that about the Prophet ﷺ's birth, the Mawlid. موت والد بي وذكر مرضعاته. It's already 10:30. Oh, it's 9:30? My watch is, the hand is not, okay, so we have time. Is there any questions about that section? Mm-hmm. Oh, good point. Yeah, because ha, fa, la is, and jabal is actually the soundest. The abjadiyya is a way that the Arabs mark dates. So they mark dates with letters. Each letter has a numerical equivalent. So abjaz, hawaz, qurishat, like alif is 1, ba is 2, abjad, jim is 3, dal is 4, ha is 5, waw is 6, right? That like that. So that it's just it's a mnemonic device they use. You know, they have لقد رقصت غرناطته لابن عاصمي وساحت دموعا في القضاء المنزلي. Ibn Asim was a great qadi, wrote the Tuhfat al-Asimiyya. He لقد رقصت, so the year he was born was ra, qaf, sin, ta. It's just a way that they do that. So that's where the 800 is. بطالع الجدي وكان المشتري. Okay, we did that. Any other question? Mm-hmm. Well, they celebrated his being every day and they didn't have any particular, no. There's no doubt that it was a later innovation in terms of doing it on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal. There's no doubt that is a bid'ah to do that. Now, depending on the school, bid'ah is not all bad, and that's the dominant school of the ulama, is that there are bid'ah hasana. Man sanna fil islami sunnatan hasana falahu ajruha wa ajru man amila biha. Whoever does a good sunnah in Islam, he has a reward for it. The Prophet also said, Man ahdatha fi amrina hadha ma laysa minhu fahuwa rad. The hadith of Aisha that Imam Nawawi relates, that whoever introduces into the religion what is not from the religion, then it's rejected. So the Mawlid celebration of the Prophet's birthday, for instance, a man asked in the Sahih collection, a man asked the Prophet about fasting on Monday, and he said, Fihi wuridtu. That's his answer. It is a good day. It's a blessed day. I was born on that day. We know that in the Sahih collection also that Abu Lahab, his punishment is actually lessened because he freed Thuwayba on the girl that brought him the news of the Prophet's birthday was freed. Abu Lahab was so happy that his brother had a son that he said, "You're free, anti hurra." So he freed the girl. And the Prophet said because of that, because of his being happy of the Prophet's birthday, which is why don't say I don't celebrate the birthday. Because that could be kufr. Just the Prophet said people will say, Ruba ahadikum yulqi yatakallamu bi kalimatin la yulqi laha bala. Maybe one of you will say a word, he doesn't think of what it really means. وَتَجُرُّهُ فِي جَهَنَّمَ 70 خَرِيفًا. It will drag him in the hellfire for 70 years. Because he doesn't think of what it means. So to say, I don't celebrate the birthday of the Prophet, a'udhu billah. I mean, what do you mean you don't celebrate his birthday? You have to. It's a fard to be happy he was born. If you don't celebrate it on that specific day, like I'm going to on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, that's fine. That's a khilaf issue. The dominant opinion is it's permissible and mandub to do it. It's recommended. The other opinion is that it's an innovation and it's better not to do it, that's a valid opinion. The problem is we accept their differences. They don't accept our differences. So what can we do about it? Mm-hmm.
Concerning the fact that his ancestors were propheted from Prophet, can we say the same thing regarding his descendants?
No. Because the relatives are not, it's not an insurance. Like Abu Lahab was a direct relative. And there's a severing. There is a hadith that says, تُعْرَضُ عَلَيَّ أَعْمَالُكُمْ. And it's a sound hadith. Al-Bazzar relates it. حَيَاتِي خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَمَوْتِي خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ تُحْدَثُونَ فَيُحْدَثَ لَكُمْ تُحْدِثُونَ فَيُحْدَثَ لَكُمْ. My life is good for you and my death is good for you. You do things and then there are things in response to those things that you do. And then he said, تُعْرَضُ عَلَيَّ أَعْمَالُكُمْ. Your actions are shown to me. And he said, إِذَا وَجَدْتُ خَيْرًا حَمِدْتُ اللَّهِ وَإِذَا وَجَدْتُ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ اسْتَغْفَرْتُ لَكُمْ. If I find good, I thank God. And if I find other than that, I ask forgiveness for you. Now, the ulama say about that, are the a'mal jumlatan or are they bitafsil? Does he see everybody's specific action? And this is the Brelvi Deobandi debate for some of the South Asians that know about this problem. Does he see all your actions, or does he just have a general idea of the state of the ummah? That's a khilaf issue. But the hadith is sound. It's not mutawatir, and so we can't base aqidah on it again, But it is a sound hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He knows the state of the ummah. I mean, that's the basic belief that we have, that He knows the state of the ummah and that He asks forgiveness for His community. Oh, thank you. So what I was going to say was there's a hadith in the Muwatta of Imam Malik where he sees some people and he thinks they're from his community. And then he calls them, he says, Halumma, to come over. It's in the Muwatta. And then the angels say, قَدْ بَدْرُ مِن بَعْدِكَ. They change things after you. And he says, سُحْقًا وَبُعْدًا. Leave and go away. That hadith, some of them say that it's the people of bid'ah. But the people of bid'ah still have a nisbah to the Prophet ﷺ because they're not in kufr. The dominant opinion is that those are the people that were believers, and then the moment they went into ridda, the Prophet is disconnected. The connection's broken. That's why he doesn't recognize them. He thinks they're from his ummah, but then he's told no, because the last thing he saw that they were in faith, and then when they went into kufr, the connection was severed from them. So that's one of the opinions. So somebody who is a descendant, that can be severed. That relationship can be severed. It's not a guarantee. And the Prophet said to Fatima, "I'mali fala ughni anki min Allahi shay'a." Work, because I can't help you. That has to be understood. فَلَا أَنْسَابَ بَيْنَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ. Allah says in the Quran, there's no nasab between people on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. You can't help your relatives. Ibn Abbas said, فِي نَفْخَةِ الْأُولَى. That's in the first trumpet blast. But then, يَأْذَنَ اللَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ فِي الشَّفَاعَةِ. Allah permits people to give shafa'ah. So prophets make shafa'ah for their people. People, relatives can help their people. If like the martyr makes, he gets intercession. So people have intercession on that day. We believe that. So people can make intercession. But kufr severs the tie. That's the bond that we have. As long as we're in the world, we're bonded by blood. But once we leave the world, it's only a spiritual bond that connects us. And blood is a bond that is maintained in the next world with the spiritual bond. If there's no spiritual bond, then the blood bond is severed with leaving the body. But if there's a spiritual bond, the blood bond and the spiritual bond are even stronger, which is why the Prophet will make intercession for his family before anybody else. Wallahu a'lam. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
When and how is it most recommended to celebrate the Prophet's birthday? Because if we celebrate it on a particular day annually, coming back to something you said earlier on, the days ago.
Sidi Ahmed Zarruq's opinion.
Sorry?
Sidi Ahmed Zarruq's opinion about like doing a regular. Well, that's what I mean. I mean, some of the ulama don't have a problem with that. Some of them do. It's a khilaf issue. People that do it every year on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, after Imam Suyuti wrote a fatwa, very nice fatwa. The Malik Dhafar is the first one to start it. He's considered amongst the righteous kings. He made it a huge event, and the ulama istahsanahu. They thought it was a good thing, and that's generally the opinion. Some of the ulama said, no, we shouldn't do it. Again, it's the standing and sitting. You know, people that sit do it out of respect for the sunnah. People that stand do it out of respect for the scholar. In Andalusia once, one of the ulama came into a room and everybody stood up for him, and he said, Nuhitum an hada. You know, you were prohibited to do this. And Imam al-Hatimi was in the majlis, and he said, no, we weren't. He said, Nuhita an tuhibba lana an naquma lak. You know, the prohibition is that you should like that we stand up for you. Now the Prophet ﷺ said to his Sahaba, لا تقوموا كما يقوم الأعجم. Don't stand up like the non-Arabs stand up. Right? That's true. Sidi Mawaq, one of the great Andalusian scholars, said in his commentary on Khalil that all of the hadiths in which the Prophet tells people not to behave like the non-Arabs is only for the Arabs. Because he was saying, maintain your distinctness as a people. Don't just... Because he knew that they were going to go into these other places. They would be flooded by other cultural traditions. And he was saying, hold on to your cultural distinctions. That's what he said it meant. And that makes a lot of sense to me personally. Mm-hmm.
So what's the most appropriate way do you think to celebrate the birthday? Is there anything
I don't have any... I mean, personally, we celebrate the Mawlid. We celebrate it throughout the year, though. Not just specifically on the 12th. I mean, I celebrate it all the time. I read this is a Mawlid right here. I read it all the time. So I'm happy every day. Allahu Akbar. Happy birthday, Ya Rasulullah. Wallahi, I'm happy. I mean, alhamdulillah, I'm happy he was born every day of my life. Wallahi, I'm really happy. I don't need the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal to be happy about it, but when the 12th is there, it's really nice too. So it's all good. No, he's going to make shafa'ah for disbelievers. Yeah, that's the sound. That's the maqam. That's his maqam. Maqam al-Mahmud is when he, for all of humanity, he makes shafa'ah for them. For relief on the Faza' al-Akbar.
will there be anybody in hell?
Well, we don't... I mean, there's definitely be people in hell. But there's a hadith... one of the most extraordinary hadiths about that is that he asks God to permit him to bring out anybody that said, La ilaha illallah. That's all. And he permits him to do that. And then... once everybody makes shafa'ah, Allah says, now there's nobody but me. And He takes anybody who had an atom's weight of faith in his heart out of the hellfire. So, I'm looking forward to that day. I swear to God. I can honestly say I am looking forward to that day. I mean, I want to have a life. I'd like to see my children grow up and be there to help them. But I'm looking forward to Yawm al-Qiyamah. I really am. I think it's going to be an amazing day. For me, it's the director's. You get the director's commentary. It's it's gonna what did all this mean? It's gonna be amazing. You get to see the whole thing. We're gonna see it all, and Allah said He's going to explain it to us, like what it all meant, and we're all just gonna marvel, and it's gonna be amazing. And I'm looking forward. Allah says in the Quran, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. Those who are looking forward to the Day of Judgment. And I want to be amongst those, and that's how I feel. I'm looking forward to it. I want to see the tyrants squirm. Really, I want to see the whole... It's just going to be amazing. And I'm not denying it's a scary, awesome event. It's going to be... I believe that, and I hope we're in the shade. I love people for the sake of Allah. Wallah, I love you for the sake of Allah. The Prophet said that the people that love each other for the sake of Allah, they don't have a problem on that day. And I'm counting on love. I'm not counting on my actions. I'm not counting on my prayers, my fasting. I'm not counting on any of that. I am counting on mahabba. Because I love my teachers. I love Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy. I love the Prophet ﷺ. Mahabba that's what I'm counting on. That's my deen. Wallahi, I'm counting on mahabba. And Allah says, أَيْنَ الْمُتَحَبُّونَ فِيَّ. Where are those who loved each other for the sake of Allah? For my sake, where are they? I want to be amongst those people. Those are the people, I want to be with them. أُظِلُّهُمَ الْيَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلِّي. I'm going to give them shade on this day when there's no shade but my shade. And mahabba, it's mashallah, it's such a gift just to love, to have love for people. It's a gift. No, we can't identify anybody going to hell. Nobody. Because we don't know. I don't know what their state is with God. Only God can judge people. You don't know what their conditions. What do you do if you're born into a family where, your father's raping you? Because there's people that happens to. I don't know what, I don't know what that means. I don't know how their attitude towards life's going to be. I don't know, what... There's so many weird things on the planet. It's only God can sort this thing out. I don't want to judge anybody. And it's not our place to judge people. We judge by the outward. That's what we were told to do. I was told to judge by the outward. So we judge by the outward. If I see something wrong, it's wrong. You're a wrongdoer. But the inward reality of people, I don't know. The man who was a mass murderer, and he wanted Tawbah, and the monk said, there's no way God's going to forgive you, so he chopped his head off, made it 100. And then he's still feeling bad, and he went to another person, and he said, you go to the land of the Muslims, and you can get Tawbah. So he set out, and he died on the way. He didn't even get there yet. And the two angels, the Adab and the Rahmah, came and argued, no, he's mine. He's going to hell. Killed 100 people. And the other one said, no, he was trying to make tawbah. And the hadith, which is in Imam al-Nawawi, relates in Riyadh al-Salihin. It's a sound hadith. And they measure, and he was closer to the people, to the Muslims, so he gets to go with them. That's somebody killed. That's a mass murderer. So I don't know. Most people out there that I see, they're pretty decent people. They're nice people, and God certainly doesn't have to burn people, I know a lot of nice people that aren't Muslim, and I find it very hard to believe that they're just going to roast in hell. I just find that hard to believe. But if Allah wants to do that, amantu billah, He can do whatever He wants. But I'm not going to assume that about God. I don't assume that about God. I just don't. It's not my assumption. I just think it's deeper than what it appears. to people who are reading these texts without really thinking deeply about them. Wallahu alam. I could be wrong. What's that? We should pray for non-Muslims. I mean, there's a thing in here. He mentions the Shia, and he said, may God, ugly their faces or something. I just changed it to, may Allah guide them, I mean, I'd rather make dua for somebody than against them. But that's my nature. I've never made dua against anybody. Alhamdulillah. I don't make dua against people. Even people I don't like, that I'd like to make dua against them. There's a hadith that says if you make dua against somebody, it first takes permission from God. And if you're more worthy of that dua, it goes back to you. So take your chances. What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not supposed to pray for somebody who died in a state of kufr. Yeah, if you know they died in a state of kufr, yeah, you shouldn't pray for them. But for instance, in the Quran, for people whose parents are non-Muslim and they were good people or something like that, you can recite the du'as of the Quran. وَارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. I mean, that's a du'a in the Quran. Nobody can tell you can't recite that. So, if you want to recite that du'a, it's perfectly acceptable to recite that. Everything's going to be made clear. Your whole life. And we believe, like the Jews, we believe in the ard. The ard is where you actually have to watch the film of your life. Sa'atan sa'atan. Imam al-Awza'i said, تُعْرَضُ عَلَى كُلِّ أَحَدٍ حَيَاتُهُ سَعَةً سَعَةً. Each frame by frame. Yes. Yeah. So, the Jews, we share that. The Christians don't know about the ard. But the Jews and the Muslims know about the ard. Now we have, like Sony Pro Cut, our editing suite is Tawbah. Astaghfirullah. You cut out those frames and hope that it's accepted. Inshallah. Well, well, like I said, to say somebody's a disbeliever in reality is up to God. The ruling of kufr is, there's outward situations where the ruling is that it's kufr. So the Prophet ﷺ said, al-mu'minu la yarith al-kafir. The mu'min doesn't inherit from the non-Muslim, the kafir, and use that word kafir. So if somebody died in kufr, the outward hukm is that they're kafir. But are they kafir mukhallad fi nar? We can't say that about anybody. We cannot judge people that they're going to hell or not. We can't say Hitler's in hell. We can't do that. It's not our authority to do that. I think there's a high probability. I don't know though. And that's justice and mercy are problems. These are paradoxical, divine justice and divine retribution. We believe in divine justice, but we also believe in divine mercy. And according to, if you want to use the Isa, if it's a sound narration from him, but in the New Testament, he says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged. For by the standard by which you judge, so too shall ye be judged." The idea is that if you're always demanding justice of everybody, that's the criterion that God's going to use for you on the Yom Al-Qiyamah. If you're always forgiving people, irhamu man fis sama, yarhamukum man fil ard. That's the first hadith that we take in our hadith studies. Have mercy on those on the earth, and the one in the heaven will have mercy on you. So if your standard is justice, if you want justice, then that's probably the standard that God's going to use with you. I don't want justice. I want rahmah. It's as simple as that. So, but it doesn't mean that people aren't entitled to justice. People are entitled to justice. It's just beware of what you ask for, because God is just. And sometimes the things that happen to people that they think are unjust are actually acts of justice. They just don't see it. So but there's no doubt, the Quran is filled with verses about justice, about establishing justice. One of the divine names is Adl, and Allah will manifest that name on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. He is going to be just to a certain group of people that deserve justice. Other people will deserve mercy, and Allah decides who those people are, and that's bimahdi fadrihi. They don't even deserve mercy. It's actually just from His bounty that they're shown mercy. Allah says in the Quran, لَوْ يُؤَخِذَ النَّاسِ بِظُلْمِهِمْ مَا تَرَكَ عَلَيْهَا مِنْ دَابَّةٍ. Had God taken people to account for their wrongs, you wouldn't see a living thing left on the earth. And that's what Allah says. So, but He also says, رَحْمَتِي وَاسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. My mercy encompasses everything. And He's going to give it specifically to the people of taqwa. سَأَكْتُبُهَا لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. Alhamdulillah. So Yawm al-Qiyamah it's going to be an amazing day. It's going to be a clarifying day. It's going to be a day where Allah will inform people about the things they were differing about. He's going to make it all clear of why things were the way they were. And that's our belief. Without Yawm al-Qiyamah, this place is a complete madhouse. I mean, it's as simple as that. If you don't believe in Yawm al-Qiyamah, none of this makes sense. Because there's so much injustice on this planet. There's so many wrongs. There's so many... It can only make sense with a just day where people will have their due. Even a dog, all the animals are raised up. Even they get their day. So even the animals will get their day. Animals that were beaten, that were mistreated, they're all going to have their day. Even the earth. The Prophet ﷺ said the earth is raised up, and every kullu shibrin dhulima, every handspan of earth that was oppressed, God is going to give it retribution on that day. That's why dhulm is such a scary thing. So these are about tajalliyat. You can read the Quran. I'm in a rahmah mood today. Tomorrow, this dars could have been completely different. My kids all came from America. I'm feeling, So, but really, it's about tajalliyat, and Allah is adl. So I could give a talk on His justice, and it's all real, and it's going to happen. And I hope some people get justice. I mean, I really do. There's some people I feel they really deserve it. They would have to. It's the cruelest people. There's people that are so cruel that torture other people, do horrible things. I mean, if you're going to kill somebody, kill them. But to torture them and to enjoy it, no. Those people, I want to see them, I want to see them get retribution. I don't want to. They need retribution. They would have to have retribution. So... But for many, many people out there, there's just a lot of good people, and every act of kindness will not go unnoticed or unrewarded. Aisha once gave a beggar a grape, one grape, and one of the women that was with her, she said, "Do you see any ajr in that?" She said, "Kam min dharra fi hadha al-inab." How many atoms are in that grape? Just one grape. Kam min dharra. The indivisible, the atom. Kam min dharra. So every atom's weight of good will be seen on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. And every atom's weight of evil. So it's going to be it's all going to be done. But Allah's rahmah is great. It's vast. And that's what I hope all of us want. I mean, I don't know anybody who asks for justice for themselves. They ask it for other people. But nobody I know in their right mind say, "Oh God, be just with me." I don't know anybody that said, but they say, "Be just with Abu so-and-so." I mean, they want it for other people. They don't want it for themselves. That's where I feel like I'd rather want justice for other, rahmah for people than justice for everybody. That's what I would rather have. Because that's what I want for myself. And the Prophet said, none of you truly believes until you want for others what you want for yourself. I want mercy for myself, so I want it for other people. But like I said, there are certain people on the planet, I think they're a very small minority, but they're shayateen al-ins. And they really need to be taken into account, and I believe Allah will do that. Is that clear? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Even before the day of judgment, won't we know our fate when we get to the grave?
Well, there's definitely, we believe in adab al-qabr. We believe the qabr is a first stopping place, and it's either, the Prophet said, it's either rawdatin min riyad al-jannah or hufratin min hufr al-nar. It's either a meadow from the meadows of paradise or a pit from the pits of the fire. But don't forget that there Ashab al-Jahim, there are a lot of Muslims that are from the Ashab al-Jahim, but they won't go to hell. So, the Prophet said that تفترق أمتي إلى 73 فرقة كلها في النار إلا واحدة. My ummah will split into 73 sects. All of them are in hell except for one. And then they said, which one is that, Ya Rasulullah? He said, Ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, what I follow and my companions. Well, that's a very small group of people, if you think about that. So the way that the ulama interpreted that meant kulluha finnar lawla shafa'a. All of them are in the fire had it not been for intercession. In other words, it doesn't mean they're going to hell, or they might spend some time in that, in like a purification, So, and even Imam al-Ghazali said, "Walau lahza," like a flash, the pasteurization, like a flash, they just to be entered into the paradise, they just need that the dross of their bestiality to be removed, so that they can go in a pure state. But for a lot of people, sickness, all those things, sakarat al-maut, those things are all purifying things. Cancer, those type of things just remove sins. I mean, we believe that. Things that you suffer in life, a lot of things you don't think about. You stub your toe, you get, those are all kafat. We believe those remove sins. Fevers remove sins. All those things. Wudu removes sin. So even though you're sinning all the time, you're also, if you're a believer, you're getting the removal of sins all the time. Now the problem is big sins, the mubiqat. What the Christians call the deadly sins, because they put the soul in a state of the sanctifying grace can actually be removed. So that idea is, we have that idea as well. The kaba'ir are very serious. If you don't make tawbah, you're in big trouble. And even if you make tawbah, you're in the mashi'ah, according to our ulama, which means Allah can accept them or not accept them. We're told not to despair. La ta'asu min ruhillah. Don't despair from the grace of God. We're told that, and we believe that. So when you make tawbah, you should believe it's accepted. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ana inda dhanni abdi bi, in dhanna biya khayra, wajada khayra, wa in dhanna biya sharra, wajada sharra. I'm in the good opinion of my servant. If he thinks good of me, he finds good. If he thinks bad of me, he finds bad. The Prophet ﷺ said, Man wajada khayran faliyahmadillah. If you find good, thank God. وَمَنْ وَجَدَ غَيْرَ ذَلِكَ فَلَا يُلُمَنَّ إِلَّا نَفْسَهُ. And if you find other than good, blame yourself. Don't blame God. So that's, we should have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's merciful. He's a merciful Lord. I mean, I didn't become Muslim to, I became Muslim for salvation. We didn't reveal this Quran that you're wretched or miserable. It's to make you happy. So, I mean, Muslims should be happy. Muslims don't smile enough. Just be happy. I mean, I'm so happy I'm a Muslim. Maybe it's just having been a non-Muslim before. I don't know. I love Islam. It makes me happy. I think Muslims should be happy. It's not saying you don't. Fear is important, and I'm not going to undermine that idea. It's important because Allah, the tajalliyat of Allah necessitate fear. His names, there's some fearful names, and those are real, and Allah has those tajalli. But He tells us in the Quran, those tajalli are for people that don't believe in Him, and things like that. The tajalli for the believers is good things. So alhamdulillah, that's what I've seen in my life. I've had my hardships, but the ni'am are so overwhelming. I just feel grateful. Alhamdulillah.
Regarding the Shafa, the Prophet said that when you hear the adhan and you make the dua from Maqam al-Mahmud, then my intercession is granted to him. And then others have said that if you visit the Prophet's grave, you can ask him to make Shafa for Yusuf. Could you comment on
the differences? Yeah. We're going to get to that. Do you mind if I wait on that? Because he has a whole section on Shafa'a in here. So we'll get to that. But, generally, our opinion, when I say I'm not putting myself with the ulama, trust me. Our opinion for people of Ahl Sunnah and Jama'ah, and the dominant configuration of that, because there are minority opinions within the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But the dominant opinion, the opinion that I was taught, the opinion of my teachers, is that tawassul is permitted, to ask the Prophet ﷺ for intercession is permitted, things like that. That's what I was taught, and that's what I believe, and that's I think that is the strongest opinion. Tawassulu bijahi fa inna jahi 'inda Allahi 'azim. It's a weak hadith, but it's related. It's not fabricated hadith, and the hadith of Uthman ibn Hunayf is the strongest one because that's a sahih hadith without any debate, and Ibn Taymiyyah's interpretation of it goes against all the other ulama. So with all due respect to Ibn Taymiyyah, the ulama just rejected that rejection of that hadith. So the hadith of Uthman ibn Hunayf is a sound hadith, and the Prophet taught him how to make the dua, tashri'an. He could have made the shafa'a right there because he asked him to intercede for me. But he told him, go do wudu. When you finish your wudu, pray the rakats and then pray this prayer. Allahumma inni as'aluka bi nabiyyika Muhammad. I ask you through your Prophet Muhammad. And then he said, say, Ya Muhammad. He said to say that in his dua, Ya Muhammad. Inni atashafa'u ilayka bika ila rabbi. I'm asking your shafa'a, your intercession to my Lord. Allahumma shafi'u fiyya wa shafi'ni fi nafsi. Oh Allah, make him my intercessor with you and make me an intercessor also. In other words, make me worthy of interceding for others. And that dua is sound dua. It's pretty clear. Well, it's a weak opinion, the other opinion. That's a 7th century innovation. Before the 7th century, nobody said that. But to intercede with the Prophet's not acceptable. That's a 7th century opinion. Before that, none of the Salaf said that. None of them. Nobody can find any word. And to ask them to prove that, show some opinion before Ibn Taymiyyah that counters that. There's none. And that's the opinion of Imam al-Bayhaqi, all these great ulama. They all have it in their books. And so it's just very strange, but it's become a dominant opinion because of the books and all the money that has enabled the madhab to spread like that. But it's not the dominant opinion of the scholars of Islam by any standard. So it's a khilaf. They don't accept our khilaf, we accept their khilaf. What can I say? If you don't want to do it, that's fine. It's jaiz, it's not wajib. It's just permissive. When I asked Murabt al-Hajj, my own teacher, about it, he said jaiz. You want to do it? Fine. You don't want to do it? Fine. Just don't tell people you can't do it. If they want to do it, don't tell people you can't do it because you don't have any proof. And the proofs that they use have been refuted very profoundly by the scholars. I mean, it's not وَمَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى, saying that they used to call on stones, and those stones, they did it to draw near to Allah. And then they said, نَعْبُدُهُمْ. Who worships the Prophet? I don't worship the Prophet. And to say that, well, you're asking him to ask God. Well, I ask Sidi Abd al Hadi to ask God. Abd al Hadi, make dua for me, please. Jazakallah khairan. He just made dua. What, is that shirk? So you say, well, the Prophet's dead. Not in my belief. That's your belief, that's fine. In my belief, he's hayyun fi qabrihi. In my belief, if I say Salaam alaikum in the Sahih Hadith, an angel tells him, Hamza Yusuf just said Salaam alaikum ya Rasulullah, and he says to me, Hamza Yusuf, wa alaikum as-salam. What is wa alaikum as-salam if it's not dua? It's a dua, peace be upon you. So we know the Prophet makes dua for us. So if I want to ask him to make dua for me, that's fine. Don't tell me it's shirk. I don't worship the Prophet. You know, I can take penicillin. I don't have to just sit and die of some infectious disease because it's shirk, brother. God's the Shafi. Just go straight to God. Why are you going to the penicillin? Because God put means in the world to get His blessing. Healing's a blessing. But if He made penicillin a means to that blessing, so be it. And if He made the Prophet ﷺ a means to that blessing, alhamdulillah. That's a sound hadith. Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Well, they are the best generations. There's no doubt. It doesn't mean that there won't be people in the later generations that have their afdaliyah. There will be people that come later that are as good as those early people. But as a generation, there's no generation that's going to be like them. The first generation is the generation that gave him the Nasr, the Ashab, the Muhajirun and the Ansar. The second generation is the people that took from them and preserved the deen. The third generation are those that took the knowledge from those people orally and put it down in the books. And that's how the religion was preserved and completed. So we needed all three generations for the preservation of the religion. He's from the first three. The four imams are all from the first three generations. They're from the third generation. Abu Hanif is actually considered from the second generation. Ala khilaf. I mean, some people put Malik in that generation also. Yeah. But they preserved the religion. After that, we're just looking at what they did, trying to make sense of it. But they're the ones, without them, there's no Islam. Allah used each of those generations to preserve the religion. So in that way, they're the best. We owe everything to them.
So we should show a high level of importance to learn about them?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. They're the best people to study, and all our religion comes from them. Yeah. Go ahead, ladies over here. Mm-hmm.
My question is that yesterday in the same way as it would be the human energy?
Well, I think definitely, Ibn Umar was once visited by a Christian when Umar died, and the Christian came and said to him, على العاقل أن يكون بعد الثالث كعامة الناس في الأول. And then he did his ta'zeen, he left. And Ibn Umar said to his one of the people with him, he said, قَيِّدْهَا فَإِنَّهَا حِكْمَةٌ. Write that down because it's a wisdom. Now, what that Christian said was almost like a rums, it's like he said, an intelligent person should be after the third like no average people are on the first day. That's all he said. And what he meant by that was, death, most people will take the ibrah of the death on the first day, but then as time passes, they just forget about it. And he was saying, don't forget about it. It's a ibrah. So Ibn Umar recognized the wisdom of that, and that's why we're hearing it today, because he told the guy to write it down. And so, also one of the Salaf went by a rahib, a monk, and he had white rocks and black rocks, and he was putting them into piles. And he said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Every day at the end of the day, I take these rocks out, and I think through the day of my good deeds and my bad deeds. And I put the black rocks for the bad things I did, and I put the white rocks for the good things I did, and then I see which one is more. And then ask Allah to forgive me the bad one." And he's said, that he was awla for that. Like he should be doing the muhasabah. And muhasabah is a good thing to do. So there's benefit in people of other faith. They can. The Prophet, when he went to Medina, the Jews were fasting Yom Ashura, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" And they said, "This is the day Musa alayhi salam was given victory." And he said, "Nahnu awla bi Musa minkum." We have more right to Musa than you do. And he told his Sahaba to fast that day based on what the Jews were doing. So, that's tashri' from the Prophet ﷺ. So I'm not saying do things that other faiths do, but there's definitely things that you can learn from other faiths.
I have the last part of that question.
Uh-huh.
And that would be, if what they reflect back to us is not mercy or love, we still continue to reflect back what is better than that, or better than the negative.
Well, that's the Prophet's sunnah. His enemies, he always reflected back to them rahmah, always. Even Imam Malik considered his jihad a rahmah for them. He didn't see it as an adab. He differs from the other three imams about jihad. The other three imams said it was ta'dibun li kufrihim. It was to punish them for their kufr. Imam Malik said, la, rahmatan bihim, because to stop them from oppressing people is a mercy for them. So he saw it as a mercy. I also, just my own example of, I once was on a panel with a Buddhist, and he talked about how scrupulousness, the importance of scrupulousness in your religious practice. And he said a lot of people, they work in a place and they take things from the place, and they don't think about the fact that it's not their property to take, like pens. And that just amazed me, because at the time I was working in a hospital, and I never thought about, they give out the pens for you to write. And I used to just take them home, and I didn't even think about it. But I realized that actually, from wara', it's not your property, because the hospital's not giving you those to take. They want you to use it for the work at the hospital. So I actually benefited from that Buddhist monk with that. And that's an example in my own personal.
You mentioned that we draw our view from only the Wahid sources. So the hadith, there's many hadiths that we talked about the Prophet getting our salam.
Mm-hmm.
And also the tawassul, the dominant opinion of that. Those were from, I take it, from the Wahid sources.
Yeah, but those are actions. Those are things. People forget that tawassul is a fiqh question. It's not an aqidah question. It's not a belief, it's an action. That's why it's dealt with in Hajj. It's dealt with in Bab al-Hajj. It's not dealt with in the books of aqidah. It's actually dealt with in the books of fiqh. It's just some people have turned it into an aqidah question. But it's not. It's a question of action. It's a question of action. Is that clear? Is the Prophet ﷺ nur? There's قَدْ جَاءَكُمْ نُورٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. A light has come from your Lord. The dominant opinion is that verse is about the Prophet ﷺ. He was light. There's no doubt about that. But he was in a physical body. He had a body that was kathafa, it was kathif like our bodies. It was flesh and blood, and he was human. He's bashar. But we believe that there is. I mean, again, you're going to get into debates about Nur al-Muhammadi and the whole philosophy of Nur al-Muhammadi, which is the Bralvis. For people that know about the Bralvis, that's a point of creed with them. But it's one of those things I would not even, it just shouldn't be an issue with Muslims. What that means in the Quran, that he's Nur, is it metaphorical, is it literal? Those are the debates that people get into in the details, and I don't think we need to do that. We just don't need to do that. I don't see any benefit in doing things like that, because Allah Ta'ala a'lam what exactly what those are. Is one able to attain their rights from non-Muslims the same way they can from Muslims on Day of Judgment? Is the belief of Ahlul Sunnah that non-Muslims stay in hell forever? I wrote a paper in Seasons, the last Seasons, called "Who Are the Disbelievers?" and I dealt with that question quite extensively, so people can read that to get that answer. We're making the Umrah tomorrow. Is putting a sunblock okay before making the Salat in the? That's a good question, and what I was taught, it's permissible to put on, like oil or something like that. So, inshallah, that's all right to do that. It shouldn't have like scent. I wouldn't do anything with a scent, but to put on a sunblock on. Which book are you using for commentary? On this text, the person that asked that question, on Qurrat al-Absar. I studied the book with Shaykh Abdullah wa Ahmadna, so I have oral notes, and then I also have Ghali's commentary on it. One of Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayyaz, he studied with him. He's dead now. And then I also have one of my teachers, MuhammadThe al-Hasan wal-Khadim. I have his commentary, and he gave me ijaza in that. So those are the. And then I like Barzanji's commentary on the Mawlid. Has a lot of nice fawaid in it. Consistent in his wudu. Yuhafidhu ala al-wudu. I mean, all those words of the Prophet ﷺ are on a continuum. It's good to try to stay in wudu. I try to stay in wudu all the time. Alhamdulillah. I mean, it's good to stay in wudu. If you break wudu, you should remake wudu. Just don't be without wudu. That's the best thing, to do that. But maintaining the wudu can also be reasonable. Definitely, like in the Kitab al-Hamqa wal-Mughaffaleen, the book of idiots and fools that Ibn al-Jawzi wrote, he has a sanad that one of the imams was praying and he lost his wudu, and he looked and there was a man with really good face, and he said, he istakhlafahu, like to get him to finish the prayer, and the man said, Astaghfirullah, I always have to do wudu if I'm going to lead the prayer. Okay, this is about the qadar and free will. Do we have free will, or is that free will muqaddar alayna? That's one of the major problems in philosophy and tawheed. One of the Western philosophers said, all of experience indicates free will, but all of theory demands determinism. So it's one of those paradoxes in life. But we're a middle people. The Ahl Sunnah is between the Qadariyya and the Jabariyya. We're between total freedom and between total determinism. We believe in the Qism, is the dominant opinion of the Ahl Sunnah. My favorite example for that is Imam Ali. Somebody asked him that question and he said, lift your right leg. He lifted it up. He said, now without putting it down, lift your left leg. He said, I can't. He said, it's somewhere between those two. So I think that's a pretty reasonable. 164 in the Imam Tahawi's text, if you look at 164, he gives a very good, I think that's the soundest of the Ahl Sunnah, succinct explanations of that. Also, Chittick's chapter in Vision of Islam on predestination, to me, is one of the finest in English that I've ever seen. I thought he did an excellent job at dealing with that. Really some good insights. Do you still feel that calculating prayer times is incorrect? I've never said that calculating prayer times is incorrect. Who said that? Where are you? No, I never said that calculating prayer times is incorrect. But there are prayer schedules that you have to be careful about, because most of the prayer schedules have been done with the NASA program. And some of them are averages. So you might be 5-10 minutes off in some areas. That's where I would just be careful. Because I was taught how to do determine the prayer times through movement of the shadow, and I still do that. It's an act of ibadah. Imam al-Hakim relates a hadith in which he said, "Khayru ibadillahi alladhina yura'una al-ahillata wal-adhillata dhikran lillah." The best of God's servants are those who watch for the new moons and monitor the shadow, the movement of the shadow, as a way of remembering God. I like it. It's a very nice thing to do. I live in California. There's a lot of sun, so I have I've made my own little sundial, so I know when Dhuhr and Asr are in, because it stays the same all year long. And I found that the prayer schedules, Asr is accurate. That's what I found. But Dhuhr is, it can be off. So that's all. But I don't have a problem calculating. Imam al-Qarafi said you can calculate prayer times, but you cannot calculate Ramadan. And in Kitab al-Furuq, he said the difference is that the prayer times are based on the movement of the sun, which is a mathematical calculation. So, Duruk al-Shams, ila ghasaq al-layl, that's a mathematical calculation. We know when tamid al-Shams. We know that. We can determine it with great precision. Ramadan is determined by dhuhur al-hilal, the manifestation of the moon. And the manifestation cannot be determined. It can't be calculated. If you go on NASA's website, the Naval Observatory's website, U.S. Naval Observatory, they have a section on the Ramadan for the Muslims. And this is one of the highest scientific bodies for astronomy in the world. They say on that website, the appearance of the moon cannot be determined with any absolute accuracy. It can only be a probabilistic determination. It will probably be seen. They said there's too many variables on the moon's appearance, and that sliver is really hard to see in certain atmospheric conditions. Now, they said that one day is an ambiguous day. It's probabilistic. Well, the Prophet ﷺ called that day Yawm al-Shak. Man sama Yawm al-Shak faqad asa Abul Qasim aw kama qal. Whoever fasts on the day of doubt has disobeyed Abul Qasim. Now, people that calculate are eliminating the day of doubt. So, and I was glad to hear from Shaykhna that Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya in the Majma' al-Fiqhi, not the Majma' al-Fiqhi, but the Majlis al-Ifta al-Orobi, the council in Europe, that Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi agreed with him that calculating was not acceptable. So, I personally, I know they get upset, but if you've read Caesarean Moonburst, for some of you, I don't know if you have that. The English people don't worry about this. You guys never see the moon anyway. But in America, it's a real issue. So I'll try to answer those. There's a few questions left, but it's getting pretty late. So Jazakumullah khairan. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إن شاء الله ربنا يبارك فيكم فينا السلام عليكم